Turning now to politics, today, former President Donald Trump returns to Congress for the very first time since the insurrection on January 6th, and the GOP fully embracing his return, fully embracing the big lie, pushing his persecution narrative and his accusations of a weaponized justice system. He returns a day after the GOP held Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Even Senator Ted Cruz is saying Democrats actually wanted Hunter Biden convicted to distract from DOJ corruption. Take a listen.
The Biden White House and the Biden DOJ's objective from day one was insulate the big guy, insulate Joe Biden. And so the gun crimes, Joe Biden has nothing to do with.
It's not just Hunter Biden held accountable. Senator Bob Menendez also on trial for bribery and corruption. But Democrats say Republicans only believe the justice system is weaponized when the verdict doesn't go their way. Constitutionalists believe this rhetoric is a threat to democracy. Here to discuss this and more is Caroline Heldman, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College. So much on the line. Caroline, good morning.
Good morning.
So we're going to get to the Trump returning to Capitol Hill in just a minute, but there has been breaking news, as you well know. The Supreme Court just unanimously preserves access to the widely used abortion medication mifepristone, and this comes despite this same court overturning Roe. Your thoughts?
I think they are dodging a bullet here, right? They decided not to actually address the case. They said that the plaintiffs didn't have standing, and this preserves the right to abortion, especially through the mail. 60% of abortions involve mifepristone, and so this is, I think, an important day for reproductive rights, although the fight is not over. There are other cases making their way to the Supreme Court regarding whether or not mifepristone can be sent through the mail. So this isn't the end of it, but the court has certainly decided to sidestep the issue today.
All right, let's turn to this day where the former president returns to Capitol Hill for the first time. Democrats saying Trump's return is returning to the scene of the crime. That's how they phrase it. First time actually back since January 6th. Fully embraced by the GOP. You heard Ted Cruz, what he had to say. But even Senator Mitch McConnell, who's done a total about-face since what he said about Trump after the riots. Let's take a listen to that just to remind us.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
Today, he has a very different tone. Take a listen to what he had to say yesterday.
You know, I said 3 years ago, right after the Capitol was attacked, that I would support our nominee, regardless of who it was, including him. I've said earlier this year, I support him. He's earned the nomination by the voters all across the country. And of course, I'll be at the meeting tomorrow.
Caroline, obviously Mitch McConnell not the only one here falling in line here. What's at play?
I think what is at play is their political careers. Trump has set it up so that if you go against him, he can end your career. So we see lots of folks making an about face. We saw Kevin McCarthy do it early on. We're seeing Mitch McConnell do it now. They're all getting in line because of the loyalists in his party and the way in which he has been able to maintain that loyalty, regardless of, threats to the Constitution, inspiring a violent insurrection, and now 34 felony counts. It doesn't seem to shake his supporters a single bit.
But Mitch McConnell doesn't have to worry about a political career. He's stepping down. He has to worry about his legacy. Why do you think he's falling in line?
I think it's pretty obvious that he is falling in line because his job in the Senate is to actually get others elected. And so early on when he made that flip, and it was actually a few months ago where he started to nod toward Trump, I think it is because he was worried about how it might affect the candidates that he needs to support in this election in order for Republicans to either win or maintain their standing in the Senate.
Yeah, we've just seen a shift to nationalism and right-wing politics in Europe, with France leading the way, and of course Germany and Poland and others. What omen does that send to the Republicans here in America, to all Americans?
Well, it strengthens them, and it's coming from the same place. If you're looking at what Steve Bannon has been doing across the globe and others like him, they have been orchestrating the rise of white nationalism. Here in the United States, it's white Christian nationalism. So, for example, Speaker Johnson, the highest-ranking official who's an open white Christian nationalist, folks should definitely read up on that because it's going to be a major part of our politics moving forward. It's been a hidden part, and now it will be out in the open.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But first, I do want to talk about the threats of violence that we're seeing now being normal in our political landscape. The NYPD just yesterday arrested this man with an arsenal of weapons. And protesters you saw storming the field of a congressional baseball game, threats against politicians, civic leaders, all-time high. Homeland Security warning of a domestic terrorist attack. And yet, the former president continues to promise revenge, retribution if he wins re-election. Divided politics are fueling threats of violence. Put this into context historically for us.
Well, historically, Donald Trump wins a prize for inspiring more threats against for political reasons against our leaders than previous presidents since we've been measuring it. In fact, threats went up 178% under his presidency, and most of them were directed at liberals or Democrats. We saw, of course, the foiled kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer. We saw Nancy Pelosi's husband getting attacked. Lots of high-profile cases. This rhetoric does translate into violence, and it's a real shame that we're not having more of a conversation about this.
Well, the conversation seems to be focused on a weaponized justice system. The House GOP just voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusing to turn over those audio recordings of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. Obviously, they got the transcripts. They have everything that was said, but they want those audio tapes. And Democrats say this is a total sham. This was meant for right-wing headlines. What does this say about our state of Congress that many say are weaponizing the justice system? Who's actually doing the weaponization?
Well, it's definitely going to be used for headlines, right? We know why they want the recordings. They already have the transcript. So why do you want the recordings? So you can have more of an impact in right-wing media. With that said, Giselle, I actually think that Biden needs to turn this over. There's no legitimate national security reason that he wouldn't be turning it over to Congress. And of course, Merrick Garland is following Biden's instructions. So holding him in contempt of court, he's following what his boss is saying to do. But I'm not entirely, I think Biden should turn these tapes over.
So Hunter Biden was found guilty of 3 federal gun charges. Does this shatter Trump's persecution narrative?
Well, in the world of logic and reason, it does, Giselle, but that's not the world that Trump is living in. In fact, you heard him at the Capitol talking about how the justice system was rigged. The fact that the Justice Department is going after Menendez and Hunter Biden, which, yes, he broke the law, but these cases are almost never brought. He was in that courtroom and got those convictions because his last name was Biden. I mean, it's just obvious that the Department of Justice is not biased in the way that Trump is claiming, but it won't stop him from making those claims because it's such an effective part of his persecution narrative.
President Biden, though, has handled his son's guilty verdict very differently than Trump. He says he will respect the judicial process. He accepts the verdict. He will not pardon his son. Talk to me about the contrast being made here.
It's such a vital contrast. I was relieved as someone who looks at history, not a partisan, looking at what Biden is doing. He is signaling that law and order matter, right? Law and order, these institutions, these rules that we have in place that keep our society together. And by saying that he loves his son, but he is going to uphold the law and not override it, even though he has the power to do that, sends such a strong signal of how important law and order is in holding our democracy together. Donald Trump going after law and order, that's always the first step for these wannabe dictators or folks who want authoritarian power. They go after our institutions, and law and order being one of the most fundamental. I don't think most Americans are thinking about what a threat this poses, but this is, if you look at any recipe for dictatorship, this is how it begins, going after our institutions.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier this rise in Christian nationalism and how we're seeing it from the second in line to the presidency, our Speaker Mike Johnson. But we also heard it from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She referred to the former president as the Messiah. She compared him to Jesus. Where's this? And he has, as you well know, the strong support of evangelical churches, who many are telling their parishes, if you're a Democrat, you're not welcome here. How do you fight back against that if you're a Democrat? This separation of church and state seems to be dissolving.
I grew up Pentecostal evangelical, and it is shocking to me to see how little the doctrine of Jesus Christ is being practiced in some of these pulpits. I mean, if Jesus lived today, he would be, under the least of these, my children, you've done it unto me. That means, help the marginalized, help the poor, help those most in need. He would be a feminist today. He talked to women when he wasn't supposed to. He was dedicated to making the world a better place. The doctrine of Jesus Christ is fundamentally about helping those most in need. So the idea that somehow Democrats, who, the bleeding heart party, wouldn't be welcome, any church that's doing that is not following the teachings of Jesus Christ, says this hardcore atheist.
But you grew up in MAGA country, so you know. Listen, so Trump's conviction since then, Biden has been doing slightly better in the polls for the first time in the battleground states, but it is still neck and neck. And the president faces a lot of headwinds: the war in Ukraine, obviously his age, the immigration issue dividing his own party. But the economy is doing much better than anyone expected. Right-wing media completely ignores that. Does any of this help President Biden gain momentum?
Well, the economy is a partisan indicator now. It's ceased to be a fundamental indicator, because you see, for example, that 44% of Democrats think the economy is fine compared to 13% of Republicans. It's become another partisan issue. I would say that Biden has to be concerned about his coalition coming apart, with Black and Latin men losing support amongst them, losing support amongst young people because of his stance in Gaza. He actually does need to be highly concerned about this. Mostly people staying home from the polls and not being motivated to show up in November to vote for him. And Donald Trump, lots of enthusiasm behind him, especially with the new 34 felony counts.
Well, next week we'll be talking about the make or break debates for sure. They're just a week away. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and wisdom on all the things we'll see then. Caroline Heldman, another day of just incredible, unprecedented news in politics. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Giselle.